Hi Jessica, it's Tiffany. Please find following my critical reflection for A2Module2 Panel2 with Zoe, Vivek, Doug and Danica as occurred on the 14th. I have 3 slides. The first 2 are linked because I've entitled one of them work and the next one career development, but really they go across each other. And the first overarching theme is about audience, and that underpinned almost the whole discussion. I felt understanding your audience, know thy audience, using their preferred language, and it was really interesting to hear some of the tools and resources for language that was quite useful with different audiences, whether that be disability or First Nations by way of example. I will say I'm quite familiar with some of them. The Australian government has a Year 8 literacy level. That's what we used in the National Incident Room for COVID. And there were a range of tools. The reality of doing that work, however, did not allow time for community engagement. So we worked around the clock, and you might work till 12 or 2 a.m. and then get up at 7 and do it again, and the research would have changed overnight, so you did rewrites. There was not a time for community engagement in that context. It was largely about speed. But language was really important, and I certainly worked in 62 languages, and I dealt with mask information in 62 languages. So the architecture of listening is really key, and it was a good reflection. Building systems and means by which you can actually listen to what's going on in your organisation and what your organisation is hearing and how people are engaging with your organisation. Strategic partnerships, I think, are fairly straightforward and really key, and it relates to that conversation about elders, about having trusted voices out in the community who will take your message and represent you or share your message. There was quite a bit of discussion about digital and design, and I want to quote from the International Association for Public Participation, which has a certificate in engagement, specifically on engagement design. And it says, and I quote, public participation is based on the belief that those who are affected by a decision have a right to be involved in the decision-making process. And that's on page 3 of their report. And I think that's a really key quote for me with this particular panel, doing what you can to involve those most affected or most impacted by the decisions or the policies that are going forward. So it's career development, but it also relates to work, and some of it is a bit personal. I did feel with this panel it was a bit ageist. There was mention of elders, but that's absolutely key. I would endorse that, but not a lot of recognition about the context in which you work, particularly if you're a communications professional that's starting out or maybe not progressed too far in your career just yet. The Australian Institute of Health and Welfare says that 29% of us were born overseas, so that's more than 1 in 4. Our median age as at June 2022 was 38.5, and that just under 20% of us are actually aged over 65. So it's roughly 1 in 5 of us are aged over 60. I'm Gen X. I typically manage younger staff. And I struggled with the panel's view that they're there to advocate for users of the community. They're not. They're there to do a job. They're employed to support their manager, to support the organisation or their employer, whether that be the minister or the secretary or the government or a CEO, to implement the strategic plan, whatever that looks like. And that is the context. You can advocate for users, and I certainly have stood in front of large numbers or sets of now famous doctors and nurses and the like to argue with them about what would go out to even medical practitioners on COVID. So I also don't agree that comms professionals can't do that. They can do it, but it takes time and it takes experience and it takes judgment, and you have to build trust. You have to understand you're there to do a job and you do it to the best of your ability, and but it's a negotiated process. and you just need to be able to work in a respectful way. I will always be grateful to the Rear Admiral, who was a doctor, who spent 2 hours with me explaining why the COVID pandemic was most closely related to the Spanish flu pandemic. Because I then in turn had to explain that to my team. And we couldn't produce comms materials for doctors if we didn't understand what we were writing about, regardless of what form that took. That was the context, and that again, that comes with time and experience. Pathways was lovely. It was lovely to hear Vivek, chose to follow his passion, and the different pathways that each of the panel members have taken, and how that's influenced, whether that be family of origin or life experiences, has impacted their career choices. Empathy and efficiency are always important. Often in reality, you have to be more efficient than empathetic, even though you might try. So what about the future? Well, I have to look at Jim McNamara's report on creating an architecture of listening in order to build relationships and trust. That's absolutely key, and you get a bit better at it as you get older. Flu 2023 talked about the digital turn, and I think that's one of the key themes from the panel. It's really important for comms professionals to put a hand into digital. It's a bit of a challenge in government because there's a bit of a divide there between digital and comms. And looking at Tan et al., which is really about, it was about using digital technologies to do community engagement for clinical interventions, but they did advocate and show effectiveness when using things like WhatsApp and teleconferencing, obviously as a form of community engagement. I think looking at Lee Edwards and her comments about fighting disinformation and building legitimacy, that's about relationship building, and the more trust you have and the more of a trusted advisor you become, the more legitimacy you have, not just for yourself but for anybody who follows you, whether that be a comms, PR, marketing, whichever hat you're wearing. It's about building trust. I wanted to, and that of course then legitimizes you and others. I wanted to talk about the Access Now report that was there about strategies for fighting disinformation with COVID, and really point out that Australia did pretty well on that. We had daily press conferences, we gave statistics every day. We actually followed the South Korean model, believe it or not, which is regarded as one of the most successful in the world, and I am really proud of having been involved with that. I do think storytelling is really important. You need to bring your internal audience along with you first before you go externally. You need to be clear, and if what you are hearing externally, bring that back in and again share it as storytelling. And lastly, be an advocate. Understand your context, what you're there to do, and by all means advocate and advise and provide recommendations and negotiate. Okay, thanks.